Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, the White House confirms that the U.S. military authorized a second strike on an alleged drug boat in September. But the administration stresses that the strikes were lawful. How the White House press secretary is addressing the issue. That's as Republican lawmakers back President Trump's actions against narco-terrorists in the Western Hemisphere as tensions with the Venezuelan regime increase. Luis Martinez is tracking that story. The White House vowing to continue its mass deportation operation after the deadly shooting of 2 National Guard members a day before Thanksgiving. This comes as the administration pauses all asylum decisions and permanently halts immigration from what it calls third world countries. Mario Tzu reports. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is in Russia, set to meet with President Vladimir Putin. Arian Pazdar has what the White House is about the developing peace process. The man accused of shooting a UnitedHealthcare CEO sat in court today not wearing a prison uniform as his attorneys battle to get key evidence tossed. Arlene Richards with the latest in the case. Heavy snow and dangerous travel conditions are expected to impact post-Thanksgiving travelers. A powerful winter storm is moving across the eastern U.S., bringing snow, ice, and rain. Christina Corona brings us the weather report.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The White House confirmed today that the U.S. military authorized a second strike on an alleged drug boat in September, but the administration stressed that the strikes were lawful. Here's White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt addressing the issue earlier today.
President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
The confirmation comes as Democratic lawmakers like Senator Mark Kelly have stated that active duty military personnel must refuse to obey illegal orders. The Trump administration has designated multiple cartels and gangs operating in Latin America, particularly Venezuela, as foreign terrorist organizations. The White House also confirmed that the president will meet with his national security team tonight in the Oval Office. And Republican lawmakers are backing President Trump's actions against narco-terrorists in the Western Hemisphere as tensions with the Venezuelan regime increase. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more.
Nicolas Maduro, the leader of the cartel of the Sons and of the Venezuelan regime, appeared in public over the weekend after rumors that he had fled the country amid tensions with the United States.
Les pido estar siempre.
I ask you to remain steadfast in your serenity. Be alert, ready, and willing to defend our rights as a nation. If history demands that we declare ourselves a republic in arms, history will once again see us rise up.
President Trump confirmed he held a phone conversation with Nicolas Maduro ahead of potential land strikes on Venezuelan soil.
The New York Times reported that you had a phone call with Maduro. Did you?
I don't want to comment on it. The answer is yes.
And can you tell us a little bit?
No, I can't do that.
The Venezuelan regime has deployed its military nationwide and continues to tout its ties to Russia and China.
In this year 2025, we are ready and willing to respond to any aggression against the people of Venezuela, and the Bolivarian military aviation knows that it has to strike hard wherever it has to strike.
The government of the United States is pressuring other countries because they believe they can isolate Venezuela. They pressure other countries so that airlines stop coming to our country. It is a very important step forward that we can have an increase in the flights between Russia and Venezuela.
Republican lawmakers have shown their support for the president's strikes on narco-terrorists in the region.
We have a war that's coming through fentanyl, through opioids, through cocaine. It killed 100,000 Americans last year. That's twice the number of people that died in 8 years of Vietnam, 4,000 Pennsylvanians. And when President Trump was running, he and I both campaigned on the same thing, which was secure the border, designate the cartels as narco-terrorists, and use our military.
No, he's made it very clear we're not going to put troops into Venezuela. What we're trying to do is protect our own shores.
Nicolas Maduro is an indicted narco-terrorist, and the Trump administration has made it clear it will not tolerate terrorist organizations proliferating in the region.
We are committed to taking out these narco-terrorists. President Trump is, Marco Rubio is, our entire administration.
It's important to know that President Trump has indicated that land strikes against foreign terrorist organizations in the region are imminent. These strikes would include parts of the Venezuelan military that are involved in drug trafficking as targets. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
The White House vowing to continue its mass deportation operation after the deadly shooting of 2 National Guardsmen a day before Thanksgiving. This comes as the administration pauses all asylum decisions and permanently pauses immigration from what it calls third world countries. NTD's Washington correspondent Mario Tzu has more from the White House.
The terrorist who gunned down American soldiers blocks away from the White House in an ambush was an Afghan national who was flown into our country by Joe Biden's administration in September 2021 in the chaotic wake of their botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, one of the most embarrassing moments in the history of our great country.
The White House doubling down on President Trump's mass deportation operation after the Thanksgiving Eve shooting of 2 West Virginia National Guardsmen just blocks away from the White House.
Sarah and Andrew are heroes, and we will never forget their sacrifice. That means ensuring the monster responsible for this atrocity is prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and faces the most severe punishment possible.
The White House blames what it calls former President Joe Biden's historic failure in Afghanistan and Operation Allies Welcome, which provided entry to Afghan nationals after U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021.
Nearly 100,000 Afghans were recklessly released into the United States with little to no vetting.
And vows to re-examine all Afghan entrants under Biden.
Any individual who threatens our national security or our citizenry will be subject to removal. Self-destructive immigration policies that allowed foreigners who outright hate our country and have no interest in assimilating into our culture, they've allowed these individuals to flood peaceful American communities.
This comes as President Trump announces permanently pausing migration from what he calls third world countries. And the U.S. Immigration Agency launches a re-examination of green card holders from what it calls 19 countries of concern. Citizens of the same 19 countries face a travel ban to the U.S., and all asylum decisions are currently paused. Meanwhile, President Trump's physician says that the results of his preventative October MRI are, quote, perfectly normal.
This level of detailed assessment is standard for an executive physical at President Trump's age and confirms that he remains in excellent overall health.
This comes amid media scrutiny about the president's health, some of which the White House condemns as false reporting. Reporting from the White House, Mario Tzu, NTD News.
And President Trump says the temporary immigration suspension on some countries could last a long time. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the details.
How long does your administration plan to pause asylum into the U.S.?
I think a long time.
President Trump says that the pause on immigration from some countries has no time limit but could last a while. Trump also adds that he would attempt to denaturalize some people if he has the power to.
We have criminals that came into our country and they were naturalized maybe through a Biden or somebody that didn't know what they were doing.
Following the shooting of 2 National Guard troops last week, Trump said that he would suspend immigration from what he called third world countries. Authorities say that the shooting suspect is an Afghan national who entered the country in 2021 under a resettlement program. One guardsman died from her wounds, the other remains in critical condition. The Trump administration has not named the countries that will be affected by the pause. Back in June, the White House released a proclamation that issued a travel ban or partial ban on several countries, citing concerns of terrorism and national security. The list includes Afghanistan, Venezuela, Iran, and Haiti. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reiterated on Monday that the administration has paused all asylum adjudications for additional vetting.
And the Department of Homeland Security is taking this very seriously because we are not going to allow soldiers like we saw in American streets last week to be gunned down at the hands of these foreign nationals who had the privilege of coming to the United States of America.
Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said on Fox News that the DHS has overhauled the asylum vetting process.
This vetting was paper thin. They weren't doing biometric vetting. They weren't really doing criminal vetting, criminal screening, cyber screening, financial crimes. They weren't cross-referencing. They weren't looking at social media.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says the National Guard shooting suspect was radicalized while he was in the U.S. How should we address the issue? Hear from Jim Hayes tonight on Capitol Report with Steve Lance at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The White House says the Trump administration is very optimistic about the developing peace process between Russia and Ukraine. U.S. officials are holding talks in both the U.S. and Russia. NTD's international correspondent Arian Posdar has the latest.
They had very good talks with the Ukrainians in Florida, and now, of course, Special Envoy Witkoff is on his way to Russia. This is sort of the shuttle diplomacy that you've seen from this administration play out, where we speak equally with both sides.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt praising the Trump administration's efforts in trying to end the fighting between Russia and Ukraine. She pointed to the fact that Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is traveling to Russia just one day after Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with Ukrainian representatives in Florida. After Rubio's meeting on Sunday, President Trump said that Ukraine still has domestic issues, pointing to ongoing corruption investigations.
Ukraine's got some difficult little problems. They have some difficult problems.
You just said that Ukraine has a little bit of problems.
Well, we have a corruption situation going on, which is not helpful.
But Trump stopped short of saying that Ukraine's corruption investigations are slowing down the peace process. Now on Monday, the White House was asked about Trump's comments, mentioning a statement by the previous administration which said there was no proof of widespread corruption in Ukraine.
Corruption is never helpful, and he does not want to see American tax dollars taken advantage of, which is why he has stopped the endless checks that were being written by the previous administration to fund this war.
She added that the U.S. has changed its strategy in its support for Ukraine. Instead of donating weapons directly to Kiev, Washington now sells them to NATO, which then sends them to Ukraine. Also on Monday, Russia confirming that President Vladimir Putin is set to meet with Witkoff, but a spokesman for the Kremlin suggesting that the talks on Tuesday will be held behind closed doors.
For the success of the process, we are not going to hold talks in the megaphone regime. We are not going to hold any discussions via media.
The spokesman declined to specify the issues Putin and Witkoff are set to discuss. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
A federal appeals court has ruled that President Trump's appointee, Alina Habba, can't serve as the U.S. Attorney for New Jersey. The Trump administration pushed for Habba to remain in the role after her interim appointment. The courts said she needed Senate confirmation. Challenges to Habba's tenure came after people she charged with federal crimes tried to block the charges. They argued she wasn't lawfully in the role after the 120-day interim term had passed. Habba has said she was fighting to stay in the position on behalf of all federal prosecutor candidates who have been denied Senate hearings. Other Trump nominees for federal prosecutor have also faced legal challenges. A federal judge dismissed the high-profile cases against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James for a similar reason, involving the interim U.S. Attorney for Eastern Virginia. Luigi Mangione, the man accused of killing the UnitedHealthcare CEO last December, appeared in court today. His attorneys requested the hearing in an effort to get key evidence removed from the case. NTD's Arlene Richards has more.
Luigi Mangione, 27, entered a state court in Manhattan on Monday wearing a gray suit and button-down shirt rather than a prison uniform. Court officers removed his handcuffs to allow him to take notes. He's the man accused of shooting a UnitedHealthcare CEO last December. His attorneys were attempting to get key evidence excluded from the case, arguing that they were seized unlawfully. Police had taken items from Mangione's backpack during the arrest. Items found include a notebook, a silencer, and a 3D printed handgun that prosecutors say connect Mangione to the killing. The notebook contains writings that the district attorney's office has said show how Mangione allegedly plotted the attack. For example, prosecutor filings state the notebook says, quote, "The target is insurance. It checks every box." Mangione's attorneys argue the items were obtained without a search warrant and therefore they should be excluded from trial. During the hearing on Monday, prosecutors began calling witnesses involved in the search and subsequent arrest of Mangione. A sergeant at the New York Public Information Office testified that he dispersed information to several media outlets and social media as requested by investigators who wanted help from the public in locating the potential shooter. The prosecution showed video clips of the shooting as well as several photographs that depict a man who may be Mangione. Other witnesses testified about downloading surveillance video from the Altoona, Pennsylvania McDonald's where Mangione was arrested. The witness turned over the footage to police after Mangione's arrest. Meanwhile, an emergency services coordinator testified about a dispatch call from Altoona police to check an ID provided by Mangione, which later was determined to be fake. Other witnesses were called in the afternoon, including a Pennsylvania corrections officer who was assigned to monitor Mangione. Some protesters were outside the courthouse with signs calling for Mangione's release. Other supporters watched from the back of the courtroom. Mangione faces state and federal charges. The state charges carry the possibility of life in prison. Federal prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. Neither trial has been scheduled yet. The evidence hearing in the state case is expected to continue for the next few days, while the next hearing date in the federal case is January 9th. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
More states are redistricting. Indiana House lawmakers released a draft of a congressional map. It could lead to 2 more Republican seats in Congress. The map would put the GOP on top in all 9 of the state's congressional districts. The biggest change would come in Marion County, where state capital Indianapolis is located. The county would be split into 4 separate districts and dilute the Democrats' power there. The map still needs approval. In the Indiana State Senate, Republican President Pro Tem Roderick Bray opposes the new map. Other Republicans have said they prefer flipping districts rather than redrawing the map. The White House has been heavily involved in the effort. Vice President J.D. Vance has visited the state twice. A vote is expected in the next 2 weeks. Turning Point USA is planning a rally in favor of the map. A major winter storm is sweeping across the country with millions now under weather alerts. Officials are warning of snow, ice, and flooding, urging drivers to prepare for dangerous conditions through the week. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
A powerful winter storm is sweeping across the country, prompting the National Weather Service to issue winter weather alerts for nearly 72 million people from the Rockies to southern New England. Forecasters say the system will bring a dangerous mix of heavy rain, snow, and ice, with the worst conditions arriving Tuesday before clearing by Wednesday. The heaviest snow is expected in upstate New York, Massachusetts, and Maine, with up to 12 inches possible overnight into Tuesday. Chicago could see 2 to 4 inches following a record 8.4-inch snowfall on Saturday. Icy roads are expected across parts of Arkansas, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Virginia, creating hazardous travel. Officials in Maine are urging residents to prepare for what could be the season's first major snowstorm. They recommend all drivers travel with an emergency car kit that includes jumper cables, flares or reflective triangles, an ice scraper, cell phone charger, blankets, a map, water, snacks, and a flashlight with fresh batteries. Forecasters also warn of heavy rain and possible flooding from Houston to Atlanta, where up to 3 inches of rain could fall. Major cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia may see a mix of rain and flurries. According to FlightAware, more than 5,000 flights were delayed across the U.S. as of Monday afternoon. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Coming up, FBI Director Kash Patel tells the Epoch Times that fentanyl traffickers are struggling after China's precursors have dried up. But can we expect the Chinese regime to honor its side of the fentanyl deal with the U.S.? Jeff Bradley reports. And lawmakers are working to prevent young students from being influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. A vote this week aims to withhold funding from schools that accept financial support from the regime. Alina has the details when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Drug traffickers in Mexico, Colombia, and Venezuela are scrambling after China says it stopped exporting fentanyl precursor chemicals. That's according to FBI Director Kash Patel, who tells our sister media, the Epoch Times, that the threat of tariffs is keeping the Chinese regime in check. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
When we surveil and monitor and investigate these folks, we see that they are complaining about not having the necessary ingredients and mechanics to make fentanyl. That is an immediate impact that they haven't complained about in years.
FBI Director Kash Patel says drug traffickers in South America are struggling to find the chemicals used to make fentanyl after the supply from China has run dry. Last month, China issued export restrictions on 13 fentanyl precursor chemicals as part of the recent U.S.-China trade deal. Patel says that this leaves cartels with no other alternatives to produce the deadly opioid.
And that pipeline being shut off is forcing drug traffickers to scramble, which we're seeing, for alternatives. And here's the good news. They know and we know there aren't any. That's why we came up with this list.
As part of the U.S.-China trade deal, President Trump lowered the fentanyl tariff on China from 20 to 10%. And Patel says that this gives the U.S. tariff leverage over China so that they can uphold their end of the deal.
The Chinese Communist Party has not lived up to its promises, whether written or verbal. How can you be so sure that this agreement will be honored by the other side?
Because the Chinese government wants additional tariff relief and that tariff relief to maintain, they are going to have to come to the table and continuously show the results with us. And if there isn't, or they violate that agreement on this particular issue, they know the consequences from the president are going to be severe in terms of tariffs and other matters.
In another development, European companies are increasingly moving their sourcing out of China due to China's export controls. That's according to a new survey by the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China released on Monday. The group's president says in a statement, China's export controls have increased the uncertainty felt by European businesses operating in the country, with companies facing risks of production slowdowns or even stoppages. Out of over 130 companies, more than a third say they plan to work with suppliers outside of China, while most say they're not sure how to respond to China's export controls. In October, China expanded export restrictions on rare earths, batteries, and other equipment. Those export restrictions were placed on pause for 1 year as part of that trade deal between the U.S. and China, and that doesn't just apply to the U.S. markets, but expands into the European Union. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Lawmakers are returning to Washington, D.C. this week. The House is teeing up a vote meant to discourage U.S. schools from taking grants from the Chinese Communist Party. In many cases, these grants are used to ingrain the Communist Party's ideology into the minds of young students. NTD's Melina Weisskopf reports.
House lawmakers are working to prevent young students from being influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. The Education Committee reported earlier this year that Confucius classrooms have infiltrated more than 500 American K-12 schools.
The CCP Confucius classrooms pose a national security risk, a geopolitical security risk, and an academic security risk. To combat these threats, the committee...
The chairman described Confucius classrooms as CCP propaganda outposts. Many lawmakers have raised concerns that these types of classrooms are disguised as cultural exchange, but that the Chinese Communist Party has other goals.
The CCP doesn't do these things with a charitable intent. The entire purpose of the programs is they expect something in return, control over curriculum, and thereby influence over the young minds that are subject to it.
Congressman Kiley's bill called Protect Our Kids would allow the government to withhold tax dollars from elementary through high schools that have financial support from China. It will be voted on this week.
It is unacceptable that American school districts have entered into financial agreements with entities tied to the CCP, an adversary of the United States, a regime with one of the worst human rights records in modern history.
Lawmakers recently passed legislation to tackle the issue at the college level. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Coming up, what are the Trump administration's next steps for the Maduro regime in Venezuela? A retired Army lieutenant colonel and geopolitical strategist joins us for analysis after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. To zoom in on the situation with Venezuela and the Trump administration's latest military actions, we have retired Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gobb, former Black Hawk helicopter pilot and battalion commander in the U.S. Army and now geopolitical strategist. Darren, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Now, with the focus on Venezuela, President Trump saying land operations could be next. What is the possibility of that?
Hi, Tiffany. Always good to see you, and thanks for having me on. No, I would say that the possibilities of actual land operations in a large scale are probably slim. And that is somewhat pending on the results of where Maduro actually ends up. We're getting some initial reporting that he has already left or could leave pretty soon. That remains to be confirmed and seen. But I think this would look more like, if there's anything approved by Congress to go to war against Venezuela, it would be more of an air-based operation initially to take out some critical targets that we know are being used against the United States specifically and the Western Hemisphere in general. So we'll see, but I don't think we're looking at some sort of large, like beach landing or massive ground invasion at all.
Now, there's growing scrutiny on the strikes so far, with the White House today confirming follow-up strikes on the alleged drug boat in September. Now, some are concerned about the U.S. getting involved in, say, another war. Is that a legitimate concern, or is this an appropriate response given the devastation caused by opioids in the U.S.?
Well, it's a legitimate concern as far as the picture in people's minds of the U.S. sending some sort of large invasion fleet and becoming an occupying force of some type in Venezuela. That I don't think are going to find very many people behind. However, the reality is we've been at war for a long time because of the narco-terrorist, the drug state, and Venezuela operating as really a communist ideological platform in the shape of a country that's specifically targeted at the United States, but also spreading influence across South America, attempting to control Panama. And if you want to look at who's behind that, you'll have to look to China, Iran, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Hezbollah, and others. All of these people will cooperate when they know that the ultimate target is still the United States.
Now, we saw last week the White House formally designated Venezuelan regime leader Nicolas Maduro and his allies as members of a foreign terrorist organization. In your view, is what the administration has been doing so far in line with that move?
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges is designating something as a terrorist organization and then conducting some sort of all-out war against that organization based on that designation. Is really skirting with the boundaries of what the Constitution intended as it was written and still says today. The War Powers Act does allow a certain time frame for the president to act without congressional authority, but in the end needs to get congressional authority to go beyond that. In this case, something significant against Venezuela, there needs to be action within Congress to make sure that occurs. I'm not doubting or questioning what Venezuela is and who Maduro is as a useful puppet, frankly, to the people pushing communist ideologies across the Western Hemisphere and the different parts. So I think the debate's worth having, but ultimately Venezuela is a nation that needs to be looked at very hard, and Maduro needs to go.
On the note of the communist ideology, some reports, like one from Politico, are suggesting that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is hoping that toppling Maduro will weaken the regime in Rubio's ancestral homeland, or Cuba. What are your thoughts on that?
It's certainly possible, and the reason why is the typical discussion about dominoes falling. And one of those reasons why is because we've seen the change in the election and what happened in Argentina. We've also seen what happened in Chile, by getting people voted into office who are less aligned or not at all aligned with communist or socialist ideologies and the success they've had. So that means those other nations that are still around that are adopting that are less likely to be as influenced. And Cuba is certainly on that list. At some point, the people there will become impatient too. The difference there is, of course, you're not going to change Cuba through an election because they just don't have them.
I want to go back to your earlier point about China, because what's been China's role here, and what would a Venezuela without Maduro mean for the Chinese regime?
Well, China, first of all, would look at this as, maybe a necessary opportunity to figure out who's post-Maduro, because if we didn't properly influence Venezuela to select again a good and positive leader, and which is Venezuela's choice to make, then, well, China's going to look at this as either lost opportunity or lost footing in South America with their chief nation they've been influencing through, or they're going to look at it as they're going to have to start over with somebody else and try to maintain the same thing. And that's the risk of toppling Maduro, is do you just get another guy who's just like him afterwards?
Well, Darren Gobb, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Coming up in college football, an exciting weekend of action capped by a potential shifting of power in the Southeastern Conference. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we come back. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on right now, but let's start in college football as Ole Miss coach Lane Kiffin has left for the same job at LSU. Did this surprise you?
Actually, not really. I mean, this was really a rumor the whole week that Kiffin was leaving for either the LSU job or the Florida job, and both are considered a little more prestigious than the Ole Miss job. It did surprise me a bit that he's leaving before the season's over, because Ole Miss is likely heading to the playoffs with that 11-1 record. Of course, LSU really can't afford to wait until after the season's over to hire someone, and Ole Miss certainly needed an answer too. But Kiffin said his request to coach the team in the playoffs while taking the LSU job was denied, not surprisingly. I mean, before the transfer portal era a few years ago, that was still possible. I'm sure they feared Kiffin could possibly recruit some of his players, if not even coaches, with him to LSU. In fact, you got the feeling that this whole split was somewhat acrimonious. I mean, I don't know the details behind the scenes, but there was that video circulating on social media of Kiffin being escorted to the air to a plane by police as Ole Miss fans booed him farewell, if you want to say. In any case, Kiffin gets a 7-year deal with $12 million annually from LSU. Ole Miss, meanwhile, has already promoted defensive coordinator Pete Golding to head coach. He will take over immediately. So, eventful weekend there.
Well, it was an eventful and pivotal weekend in college football, the last games before conference championship weekend. What stood out to you?
I think the most pivotal outcome was Texas beating Texas A&M Friday night. Now, that didn't knock the Aggies out of the playoffs. It was their first loss of the season, but it did eventually knock them out of the SEC title game. Now, after Bama and Georgia won Saturday, those two will meet for the SEC title this Saturday, which seems to almost always happen of late. So one of those two. I think also Ohio State's win over Michigan was pretty big, even though they were favored to do so. I think the fact that Ryan Day's job status just a year ago by Buckeyes fans anyway was in doubt is pretty amazing. I mean, he's still only 2-4 against their big rival Michigan, but now he's got that national championship in his pocket. He's won 90% of his games there, nearly 90%, so Buckeyes definitely fortunate to have him. So Ohio State now plays Indiana Saturday for the Big Ten title. Those are the only two undefeated teams left in college football. And Big 12, meanwhile, it's going to be BYU versus Texas Tech. And the ACC will come down to Virginia versus surprising Duke at just 7-5.
All right, go Duke. Shifting gears to college basketball, though, Purdue remained #1 in the latest AP poll released today, but Michigan made quite a jump.
Yeah, Michigan went from 7th to 3rd in this latest poll after one of the most really impressive weeks of early season basketball I've ever seen. Wolverines were part of that Players Era Festival tournament in Las Vegas last week. They really cleaned up. Now, they beat San Diego State in their opener by 40 points, then beat 21st ranked Auburn in the second round by 30. Then they absolutely demolished Gonzaga in the championship game by 40 points again. It was the worst loss of Mark Spew's 26-year career there. So with Michigan now at number 3, Purdue at number 1, Michigan State at number 7, the Big Ten should be very competitive this season. Even Indiana is looking good at 7-0 right now. Now this week we should get some more answers though on where everybody stands, especially tomorrow night. That's when the ACC SEC Challenge starts. We've got 18th ranked Kentucky playing number 16 North Carolina. 4th ranked Duke hosts number 15 Florida, and Syracuse hosts number 13 Tennessee. Plus, outside of that, 21st ranked Kansas hosts number 5 UConn. So that's tomorrow night, Tiff. All right, don't look for that tonight. That's tomorrow night. All right.
All right, we'll keep that in mind. Looking at NFL news, though, Indianapolis All-Pro defensive back Sauce Gardner left yesterday's game against Houston with a lower leg injury. Is there an update on his condition?
Yes, reportedly an MRI revealed a calf strain. Now that's according to a report by the NFL Network. He is considered then week to week. Now that's not great news for the Colts, who are right now tied for first place in the AFC South with Jacksonville, but it's much better than what it was originally feared, which was an Achilles injury, the way it looked like. So Colts may have dodged a bullet there. Now elsewhere in the league, Minnesota head coach Kevin O'Connell said starting quarterback J.J. McCarthy is symptom-free from the concussion that kept him out from Sunday's game. He is expected then to start this coming Sunday. In addition, the team waived veteran wide receiver Adam Thielen today at his request. Now, Thielen said this was his last season in the NFL. He wanted a bigger role in the offense on his way out. Now, elsewhere in the NFL tonight on Monday Night Football, the 10-0 New England Patriots host the 2-10 New York Giants. That is at 8:15 Eastern Time on ESPN. So make sure you get your fantasy football lineup set in case you have someone tonight. All right, Tiff?
It is set.
Very good.
Now that I've learned how to set it. Anyway, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
The White House is officially decked out for Christmas. First Lady Melania Trump personally selected this year's theme, Home is Where the Heart Is. It is the First Lady's 5th year shaping the holiday look at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. She says the decor celebrates American generosity, patriotism, and gratitude.
This year's display includes over 50 Christmas trees, Melania Trump's signature wreaths with red bows outside the windows, and the official White House Christmas tree, an 18-foot fir in the Blue Room. In the East Room, the patriotic decor honors America's upcoming 250th anniversary. The Green Room focuses on family fun with games and Lego portraits. The Red Room highlights her Fostering the Future initiative, decorated with thousands of butterflies. And in the Blue Room, this year's theme honors Gold Star families. Blue, gold, and ivory decor and custom 3D printed ornaments show every state's bird and flower, and gold stars symbolize sacrifice. And in the State Dining Room, a massive gingerbread house features the South Portico, built from more than 100 pounds of gingerbread dough. Public Christmas tours begin tomorrow.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.